Good morning.
Welcome to my house. On this beautiful occasion to be with Robert Kelly, a man of letters and sciences. We always had good time in those days. I have known now Robert for good 50 years. From those days, before the shadow line, when we were careless, we never got up at 8 o'clock. If anybody would have told me, oh, let's meet tomorrow at 10 o'clock, said, I may not be going to bed yet. Those were the days when I used to see Robert carrying huge bags of Greek delicacies. So, not to take much of your time, I will now pass the baton to the Master of Ceremonies, Phong Bui.
Thank you for being here. Good morning. It's a terrific occasion for our contemporary world of poetry. Certainly a terrific privilege for me and Jonas to be part of this all-day celebration of a remarkable man, a remarkable poet, a uomo universale, a poet, a writer, translator, playwright, friend and teacher of many other Robert Kellys within one Robert Kelly's 75th birthday. And I'm sure that all of us, all of you, myself included, and the readers, would try the best we can to share our personal insights of a much complex, rich, yet generous, and I would say inspiringly prolific body of work that he had created over, I think, a span of 50 years now. And therefore, there's no need to read his long biography. It would be ridiculously unnecessary, but I would say the same for the rest of the reader. What we would like to do, as Jonas has, I think, one sentence from a long paragraph of his landmark anti-100 years of cinema manifesto, would say, I am for art which we do for each other as friends. And I think that we would like this event to be as casual, as intimate as possible, not treating it as an event actually, rather thinking of it as a gathering. And I think I would like to read something first that I think Robert's old friend, Jerome Rothenberg, have written. And I will introduce the first reader as we go on. I think there are 16 readers. We begin in the next 10 minutes or so, maybe 10, until 1:15 we will break for lunch, maybe an hour, and we finish the rest of 6 readers.
Before you begin the event, Robert asked me to read something in the oldest language that exists, Lithuanian. But since I have nothing with me, and I am not Pushkin, who remembered all these poems by heart, I will say 2 lines, which with Bakaitis told me just a few minutes ago, that when Levinas, the philosopher, was asked to say something in Lithuanian, he said, Kai du stos visados daugiau padarys. And he also remembered the first lines of the Lithuanian anthem that goes, Lietuva, tėvynė mūsų, tu didvyrių žemė. That is how Lithuanian language sounds. Now it's all yours.
Thank you, Jonas. I think you might have to translate that for us later. But like I say, we'll begin with 10 readers, and then we'll break for lunch around 1:15, and then continue. I think we'll picked up at 2:15 with the next 6 readers, including Kimberly. Hopefully, will be here later, along with her, I think, film body collage, and we'll end up around 4:30 to 5 with our beloved poet himself will read. And then around, I think, 7 o'clock, you're all welcome to come for an extended dinner party at my place, the Brooklyn Rail. The direction will be given to you a bit later. But I'd like to begin what Jerome had written for this occasion, which goes something like this. Robert Kelly was a poet essential to my own formative years as a poet, a time of transformations, now several decades in the past. With him, there was a brief time in which we struggled together in the dimensions of deep image as a strategy of composition developed by us, along with a cohort of contemporaries in New York and elsewhere. In my own case, this was the forerunner to that ethno-poetics to which I came on my own by the end of the 60s. But looking back now, I feel that it was Robert who was an early one and possibly the first to point me in that direction. Robert, wow, so beautiful here. With something of that in mind, he wrote to me recently to recount a memory he had of readings of mine which I used in Seneca Indian horn rattle to drive home my spoken performances. He enclosed with that a poem that spoke to those occasions, and I answer with a short group of prose poems that uses nouns in the manner of what Jackson McLaw, another member of our cohort, called nuclei, a form of composition that I have used earlier in the Loka variation and other poems. I was aware too that today, May 7th, 2011, there would be a celebration of Robert's 75th birthday and his 50 year as a professor of poetry at Ball College. What follows then is Robert's rattle poem, along with my poem in response to it, which are printed in the program, and I wish you can read that on your own some other time. My admiration for his life and work is no less now than it was though many years ago, and my gratitude is even greater. The first speaker of our program is a poet, writer, translator, I think known for his also epic poems for the millennium, who actually gave a wonderful reading at the Rail's office not long ago during my absence. So this is nice for me to welcome him, and I have a chance to hear him again. Please welcome Pierre Joris.
Thank you. And yes, Jerry would have loved to be here, but the old nomad and Diane this weekend are he's shaking the rattle in Barcelona. So he'll be back. I did want to mention also that this is the 40th anniversary of the Anthology Film Archives. And they've had a fundraiser, yes. There's a fundraiser that goes on, and you're welcome to contribute to it so that we can have the next 40 years of the archives going on. I've been taking notes on Robert's work ever since I first started to read him. You need to take notes. In late 1967. Permit me to collage a few of these together in parts of this long process to give some sense of what it has meant for this here foreigner to spend over 40 years with this immense American oeuvre. The notes start in Mandell-on-Hudson, go via New York City, Luxembourg, Paris, London, Constantine, San Diego, back to New York, and this time they go to Brooklyn. All quotes are, unless otherwise indicated, are of course from Robert's work. Quote, "It may be that every man is set upon the earth to find one new method of divination, that is, to write one sentence whose syntax is total, because, this idea is familiar, syntax is the heart of divination, to locate the function of a thing in the structure of process. We must remember that. Who are we?" In my notebook on the page facing this quote from Alchemical Journal are the following lines by Robert Duncan, a juxtaposition that happened by, quote, chance, and makes sense. "And this poetry, the ever-forming of bodies in language in which breath moves, is a field of ensouling, each line intensely a soul thing, a contribution, a locality of the living." Interpolation, the story so far. I first met Robert and his work while studying at Bard in the late 60s. I was then quite unable and unwilling to come to terms with the poetry. My own vision of the poet and the poet's concern was still, to a large extent, caught up in the familiar European vision of the poète maudit, à la Rimbaud, Nerval, Ducasse. Thus anything relating in any way to the scholarly in some way was suspicious. I was aware that the best energies in the field were in America, having been turned on in Europe as a teenager by the beat poets, by Ginsberg and Burroughs and so on, Bob Kaufman, and they were the only modern Americans known in Europe. And now here was Kelly, a poet involved at least as much with the European as with the American Renaissance. I had gone to the US to get rid of a heritage I felt around my neck like the famous albatross. And I was suspicious of what I had, what then I kind of misrepresented as Robert's style. So Robert wrote somewhere, I quote, "Style is death." Sensed a kind of high style, something close to discourse. And I saw that as a root symptom of that European sterility that you get in those highfalutin poets like Saint-Jean-Perse, right? So that was my misconception at that point. Now, the one modern poet, European poet, I love then as much as I do now is, of course, Paul Celan. And for my Bard thesis senior project, I translated Atemwandel, and it was suggested that Robert would be the perfect person, and actually the only person to work with at that point. And earlier on, I had made the decision not to get too close to Robert. I saw myself as a comet, a yet unsolidified gaseous mass, happily hurtling through the new spaces that had just opened up, that American space. And Robert was too massive a star, surrounded by a powerful magnetic field. And if I let myself approach too closely, I was afraid that I would be satellised around this thing. And, would wind up a dead moon in an orbit fixed around the sun. I wasn't sure it was a sun, actually. I was wrong. Working with Robert Kelly on the Celan translation turned out to be one of the most exciting and fruitful periods of my education. What first made me like Robert's work was his immense curiosity, that basic sense of wonder he had kept intact in a time, a decade, if you remember the 60s, when coolness, that blasé stance of disconnection, an arrogantly assumed negativity was the order of the day. And Robert represented the exact opposite of that, this absolute hunger, this absolute energy and curiosity. The breadth of the concerns, his vision of the modern poet as a man to whom all data whatsoever are of use, like Pound, Goethe, Coleridge. That's the company, as Creeley would say, that Robert is in. They do not have hobbies, Robert wrote. They eat everything. Quote, "The fact that there can be, and that historical times has been, now is, a scientist of holistic understanding, a scholar, a scientist of the whole, the poet." This realization and the joy that comes with it finally enabled me, on my return to Europe, to begin dealing with, looking at those European roots of my own that I had so frantically tried to shake off by going to America, and found myself able, from that moment on, to spend a lot of my reading time with Robert's work, and I still do this. August 30th, 1969, Luxembourg. Quote, "It does not matter if you do not understand. I am unfolding a necessary story, putting the blocks out clear on the floor. whether you want to or not, you'll pick them up when need sings. In October 73 in London, I wrote, "What is needed now for anybody coming to Robert Kelly's work for the first time is a way in. The massiveness of the published work to date, 32 or 33 volumes, double now and more, demands it. There are, to my mind, two distinct possibilities to achieve this. An essay, not necessarily of the cricket species, laying out the core concerns, and until we get such an essay, and by now, in fact, what we need is 6 books, at least. That desire of 1973 has not yet come to fruition. So there's a pitch to the crowd, by the way. We need books, we need readings of Robert's work. But you can get a good fix if you're new to the work. If you read the various prefixes, if you read of the magazines and of the volumes. And in fact, there is in every book of Robert's several poems, nearly each poem is what Alan Fisher and I in England began calling process showing. That is, that the poem itself shows how it is put together. So it gives you a handle. There is a handle on the poem, in the poem, to read it. Quote, "The organism of the macrocosm, the organism of language, the organism of I, combine in ceaseless naturing to propagate forth the poem from their trinity." That was a very core prefix to one of the great early books. So another possibility for a way in would be to turn to Robert's own essays. And here again, this is a pitch to everybody who's here today, the young ones who have that energy. The need is to bring the out-of-print books back into print. I'm thinking particularly of that wonderful little volume called In Time, and the essays somewhat later that were connected to it that were published in the Biopoesis issue of IO, I think it was. And then there are some other essays, poem essays, that kind of disappeared that were published. I remember there was a sequence called Texts, which were readings of people, and I published one of those, the one on Robert reading Heidegger in Sixpack 9, and then there was there was another sequence that he never published except a few in magazines called Organon. And I think that out of all that material, one could at this point put together a marvelous book of Kelly on poetry. I think we need that still. And I would add the Chemical Journal maybe as the opening shot of that book. I had extended this list, and I talked about it in more detail in my first essay on Robert for the Vote issue, and I had called it there a primer for the gradual understanding of Robert Kelly, thinking of Gertrude Stein, whose work is also vast and big. July 1906, Luxembourg. In front of the agony of any being, we are stupid mute. What is important to each man he never says, never learns it till the light walks out of the sky, and he is left alone with his failed utterance, impossibly clear in the dark. Write everything, the oracle said. July 18th, New York City. This poem, Last Light, right now, for me, Robert's finest single poem, bones laid out clear, no unnecessary weighing down by knowledge, esoteric or other. That wisdom I think of as the highest form of wisdom, namely, that wisdom without action is sterility. Quote, "What is not here is nowhere." The anguish of the work is the discovery of the correspondences. Once they proclaim themselves, they never let the philosopher rest. Next quote. "Bother with no writer who will not stand by his words, to death if necessary. Trust only the literalist. Take the words of our Lord literally, any Lord." Quote, "To stick to the work like a fish to water." Dream log entry, West End, Belgium, 70s. Dreamt that I was walking around New York City. I know I was in Manhattan because I just come out of a bar I used to hang out on the West Side with William Prescott. But the place looked more like Brooklyn. It felt seedier, older, and a great number of blocks had been torn down, making the place feel like the East End of London after the Blitz. Then I noticed Kelly dancing in giant leaps across these ruins, jumping over huge boulders, crashing huge chunks of plaster with each step. It was late afternoon, and the sun was closing in on the horizon. Suddenly, Kelly stopped his dance and began running towards the setting sun along an avenue miraculously cleared of debris. And that entry is followed by two quotes not from Robert. One, there is nothing of our own which may not become foreign to us, and nothing foreign to us which may not become our own. Giordano Bruno, Cena del Ceneri. Second one, the form of the poem must be our habit, Garrett Lansing. There were also a few more questioning entries from the 70s. For a long time I waited, and I'm back in the 70s here, for a long time I waited for a poem of R.K.'s to come along and hit me straight, full blast, work me over. The Pastorals does just that, and clears up several points on which I had been doubtful, viz. My suspicions re politics, that empire stuff in time. Like the emperor responds, we are here, the lot of us make up the empire, which, I thought then, is not accurate history, at least not for the 1960-ish Jacobin self I was. We does not equal the lot of us, but is singular. The royal or imperial we is the arrogance of those who claim to be where they are by divine right or similar abuses. The lot of us make the empire too easily thus becomes the equivalent of l'état c'est moi. So yes, I go on quibbling. We do indeed know that imperial history is commonly written by such as hate the emperors, as Robert said in his essay, and it is my guess they had damn good reasons to hate the emperor. But this does not permit the conclusion that the empire was vastly superior to the republic. Or is this just my own reaction as a man raised in a country ruled over by constitutional monarchs, and at present living in a country, England, which still thinks of itself as an empire, feeling the presence of empire like a man will feel his legs or arms days, weeks, or even years after they have been amputated? I don't know, but reading the Pastorals today has convinced me that I misread. Quote, we want the whole body to erect, body politic. We want a revolution, a social erection, to fuck the obscurity of life on earth, to burn up money. I never thought you'd come out and say it so loud. Loud and clear this time around, the literal man. The one you say is the only one we may trust. That day I wrote down another quote that still resounds with me. Use is rarer than emerald. Use is never thought. How to use our intelligent skin, or make a song, or hear one, and how to use that. He has the tools, but lacks the skill, and the skill is the habit of use, made perfect. Jump cut forward some 20 years, some of my ruminations on R.K.'s selected poems. Kelly's concerns have not wavered over time, and his comments on the title of the 1971 collection, Flesh Dream Book, still hold, setting the priorities straight, as he puts it. Quote, the title Flesh Dream Book identifies the three great sources of human information, the flesh of sensory experience, dream and vision, and the holy book of tradition and learning, shared through time. End of quote. The steadfastness of concerns has taken on a myriad shapes over and in time, and one of the successes of Red Actions is how the book makes the reader aware of these formal experiments. From the sharp image-based deep image is how he and a few others talked about it back then, 13-syllable, 5-3-5 pattern looms, to the highly complex informational mappings of later poems, such as, to mention but one among many, Man Sleeping. Or the different shape and feel of those poems arising from what elsewhere he has called a ta'wil of the first line. For example, the poem starting on page 344, arising from its title, the Tibetan character pronounced ah, as against a sentence, his experiment with polysyntax, the permission, quote, the permission to take any or every word or phrase as linkable with what comes before, or with what comes after, or as capable of bearing meaning while standing alone. But my time is running out, or has done so already. Eternal frustration when talking about Robert's work. There's never time enough. So here are a couple quick outtakes from a piece I wrote on the flowers of unceasing coincidence, but that I think applies to the life work as a whole. 1, you can enter anywhere. The coincidence turns out to be the unceasing enjoyment. The movement, nomadic, belies the linearity of number, is multidirectional at all points, which makes for strange flowers, neither head nor tail. I mean, this is not a stem root flower, the old botanical tree image as mimetic paradigm, alibi of human shape and act, hubris of Leonardo's Renaissance male, centrally inscribed in circular cosmos. 2, and thus also disruption of our reading habits. No way to pull the petals one by one and muse, she understands me not a little, very much. Can't eat this daisy by the roots. Meaning, that old conundrum, always just beyond your horizon, a line of sight, a line of flight. But she says as much clearly, leading us on and in. Don't make sense, make difference. 3, beyond your horizon or on it, tangential line of our laborious straight minds touching the curved earth, meaning as the spark of the meeting of what we imagine, we think, and what is. Meaning never more than this, sparks, shards of light, a breath held. You set out to find, and what you find is, last quote, world of soft grammaticals, fractals of typography, cheating any horizon, geology of pure punctuation. All you can hear is the gap singing. Thank you.